Howdy, thanks. Honored to be here, and thanks for sticking around. I'm really impressed with you guys. As a Texan, I would never come out in this weather, so thanks for coming. Like Vince, I'm not going to talk about Congress. I am going to talk about race, and I'm going to step back and talk about American democracy and how we got to this moment. And I'm going to highlight how the Republican Party has evolved from a mainstream conservative party committed to democracy into something different. First, I want you all to think about the U.S. not as one of the longest standing democracies, but as a fairly young one. Why do I say that? Well, if you think about democracies as featuring the rule of law, as we discussed, voting rights for all adults, and the civil rights and civil liberties necessary to make elections free and fair, then the U.S. has been a democracy for about 50 years, not 250. After the Civil War, efforts to build biracial democracy in the South were defeated, and soon blacks and also many poor whites lost their right to vote in the South. And this was followed, as you know, by the emergence of Jim Crow system of segregation that was also kind of underwritten by state-sponsored violence. So not a democracy, right? Oh, sorry, was that already up there? Okay, she's very good at this stuff. Actually, by the way, let me just tell you guys, Josh Pasek got us going, but we would not be here at all tonight without Charlotte, so thank you very much to Charlotte. Okay, moving to something less pleasant, this is the seal of the Democratic Party of the state of Alabama until 1966, white supremacy for the right. So instead of a region of democracy, is a region comprising 11 pockets of authoritarian rule, the 11 states that had seceded, and they were sustained by the federal democracy around them. These 11 states were run entirely by Democrats who had a stranglehold on nearly every elected office in the region for 7 decades. By the early 70s, black activists and their paltry number of allies defeated the region's authoritarians, and the entire country, at least on my view, became a democracy for the first time. Why does this matter? One reason I think it matters is because it suggests we should be a little bit less surprised about the current wave of democratic backsliding that the country is obviously undergoing. Also, it reminds us, picking up on a point that Vince was making, it reminds us that there's usually been one party that's benefited more from racist and xenophobic appeals to the country's white voters. And for most of American history, that party has been the Democratic Party, okay? Okay, next, how do we get to this moment? Well, in my view, the current threat to American democracy really grows immediately out of the ashes of the authoritarian South. So in particular, 3 trends came together from the early 70s on that when combined lead us to this challenging moment. The first is elite polarization. Think about that as the growing size of the disagreement between the average Republican and Democrat in Congress. And this got started with the move of Southern whites into the Republican Party in the 70s. They took their conservative cultural views with them, polarizing the parties, and as we can see, the degree to which the parties have become more extreme has not been exactly symmetrical. So following their elites, growing numbers of voters viewed and continue to view those associated with the opposing party with distrust and even hatred. So again, picking up something that Vince mentioned, they look at the social groups that they imagine to populate the other party, and their views about those social groups transfer over to their views about the party. Each year, Congress breaks its record for the fewest bills passed, okay? This trend weakens cross-party compromise, but it also leads voters to grow more tolerant of anti-democratic behavior by their own party's politicians. Okay, the second dangerous trend was raised by a question a while ago, and that is rising economic inequality. It's motivated wealthy Americans who, understandably, they're smart people, who fear attacks the rich sentiment among the non-rich. It's motivated them to defend their wealth through massive campaign contributions and lobbying. And as you see up here, there's just a massive growth in the number of mega donors who are financing most Republican campaigns. So this wealth defense has really transformed the Republican Party. The mega donors are demanding radical cuts to the regulation of business, the decimation of highly popular government programs, and the nomination of extremist judges committed to interpreting the Constitution in ways that would result in major cuts to the regulation of business. And Trump's judicial appointments in the first term reflect these goals, and I'd be surprised if that changes. Now note that inequality by itself, or mega donors or libertarian policies, don't necessarily threaten democracy. It's the combination of these with the third trend that's so dangerous. Since 2011, non-whites have constituted a majority of all births in the US. There's been a growing panic about the country's ownership among millions of white Americans, a panic worsened by the reaction of many whites to the mere fact of the Obama presidency. Why does this matter? Well, like conservative parties across Western Europe since World War II, when economic inequality grows, the Republicans have had the choice of either revising their economic policies or instead appealing to voters through cultural appeals. And they've clearly chosen the second path. We see it animating the Tea Party revolt of grassroots conservatives who, as Charlotte said, at least talked a good game about being upset about budget deficits or debt, but the thing that actually united these grassroots conservatives was immigration, okay? We see it in the statements of politicians, party leaders like Lindsey Graham, who said in 2012, we're not generating enough angry white guys to stay in business for the long term. He might have been too pessimistic about that. And of course, we see it in President Trump's campaigns. These trends have combined to radicalize the Republican Party into an organization that's no longer committed to democracy. Right now, it's an uneasy combination of white nationalism and libertarianism. Given the contradictions in that coalition and the set of commitments, it's very impressive that they can frame themselves as the blue-collar party with a policy agenda, most of which remains unpopular, at least I think. We see that with the House Judiciary tweet up there. So we see the Republican Party backing away from democracy in several ways. I'm just going to quickly mention three. Am I out of time? Yeah. Shut up, Mickey. Keep going. Okay. I did thank you, Charlotte. So one, since 2000, for about a quarter century, they've worked hard to make it harder to vote, and especially their political opponents. Now, they failed so far. It's easier to vote than it's ever been, but there's no guarantee they'll keep failing at that, or that they'll stop investing in something much newer, something that we scholars of American politics never knew anything about, and that is the counting of the vote, because that was never challenged before. It was always in the hands of nonpartisan retirees, but they're working hard on that too. Second, a large majority of House Republicans refused to certify Biden's election even after the invasion of the Capitol. Third, both in 2017, 18, and even more so now, and here's some Congress, congressional Republicans refused to conduct oversight of the executive when their own party is president, which is very much unlike what they did during Watergate and many other times. We've seen this much more recently too. Less than a month ago, Republican Senator Jody Ernst announced the creation of an Inspectors General Caucus, bless her heart, dedicated to advancing the work of these internal watchdogs inside federal agencies. 9 days later, Trump began firing all of them. And the response by this caucus was really interesting, Mr. President. So the lawlessness of the administration or the possible cowardice or alignment of judges are, I agree, very alarming. But so is Republican legislators' abdication of their institutional responsibility to oversee the executive, okay? Now, to be fair to these legislators, they're inhibited from oversight both by the fear that Musk is going to finance a primary challenger to defeat them, but as the ones who are about to retire keep telling us, they're also fearful of the threats of violence that they and their families are receiving from the current of violence on the extreme right. So it kind of is understandable that they're being quiet. So I'm just going to close with one point here, and that is that the Democratic Party can't save U.S. democracy. And I mean that in two senses at least. First, the party is what some analysts describe as hollow, cut off from its voters, sinking only shallow roots into American communities, run by rich donors and even worse, consultants. It offers a laundry list of policies to voters, but not a governing program, and its federal office holders, especially those in the Senate, are really kind of a feckless gerontocracy. And I can say that because I'm older than you, but it's really true. When they held the White House, House, and Senate in 21-22, they couldn't strengthen even modestly the Voting Rights Act, and they likely won't regain the Senate in the near term. My second, final reason why the Democrats can't save our democracy is this. As Adam Pravorsky, who all of your poli-sci professors should be quoting, tells us, democracy is a political system in which parties lose elections. What does that mean? It means that the parties that lose accept the results, and they're ready to fight another day. We had a beautiful transition, that's a kind of Trump word, beautiful, this past election, but I think that's only because Trump won. At all levels of election, Republicans who lose are increasingly likely not to concede, not to say they lost, and that's hugely dangerous. For our democracy to work, while we're stuck with a two-party system at least, both parties have to be committed to democratic rule. Thus, the Republican Party has to remake itself for American democracy to be safe. How that's going to work, it probably require multiple defeats to reset their incentives, but they need to push out the extremists, the Nazis, the Kanyes, the Jewish space laser believers, and they need to take their oversight responsibilities seriously. These are long-term solutions, but your long-term, our long-term, to pick up on something Jenna was saying, begins tonight, right? There's a sharp difference between your political beliefs, at least there should be, and the organizations that may or may not represent those beliefs. Democracy-loving conservatives don't have the party home that they deserve, and they need to rebuild one immediately. Thank you.